Hi, this is Ibarian from The Candid Frame. When I take a look at photographs, especially images in the Flickr pool, one of the things that I'm hoping to do is to find images that really inspire me to see a little bit differently. It's easy when you've been shooting for a while, especially on the street, to start making photographs that you've made before that you know that you could do well and sort of repeat on what you know that works. But I don't like doing that because I don't simply want to make the same photographs over and over again, even though I know that I'm doing them well. I'm hoping that each time that I go out there that I'm pushing myself, that I'm managing to see and photograph the world a little differently each time. I want to see that I'm improving. And so when I take a look at some of the photographs that I see on the Flickr pool or on Instagram or any other site where I'm taking a look at someone else's work, I'm hoping that I'll see something in that work that will remind me the next time that I go out to shoot to see, compose, and make photographs in a way that when I take a look at those photographs and compare them to what I've done before, I will see progress. So I chose 3 images here that kind of speak to some of the things that I'm trying to think about when I'm out there trying to make my own photographs. Here we have a picture by Vijay Araj PS. This was shot with a Nikon D3200 at a shutter speed of 1,250th of a second at f3.5 ISO 100. Now, one of the reasons I like this shot is because the photographer gets in nice and close. And one of the realities about shooting on the street is that we can be sort of hampered by our own comfort level. If you take a look at a lot of the photographs that are in our Flickr pool, there's a certain distance that a lot of people sort of keep when they're photographing on the street. That can be anywhere between 10, maybe 15 feet. And the whole idea is that you have this sort of comfortable distance between you and your subject because you don't want to call attention to yourself or you don't want to impose on your subject. And so you photograph at a distance. And I find that for myself, I like shots that are more intimate. It's one of the reasons why I prefer using a 35 millimeter for the most part. But why I sometimes will also use a 28 or a 24 millimeter because I know that it's the combination of the wide focal length and getting physically closer to my subject that is going to give me the kind of photograph where I feel like I'm immersed in the scene and not just sort of this objective observer of something that's happening around me. I can make shots, with a 15 millimeter at 15 feet away or maybe even longer and still make an effective frame. But I want to feel something about what I'm photographing. And sometimes that distance creates this sort of fly on the wall sort of feel, where you're not necessarily feeling anything. It may be a beautiful composition. It may have wonderful light. You may have wonderful gesture, but you're not necessarily feeling anything. And for me, one of the ways that I try and do that is by getting in closer and really just immersing myself in the moment. And I think that's what the photographer does here. Now, he's using a kit lens, an 18 to 55 millimeter lens, and he's at the 18 millimeter focal length. So he has the equivalent of a 24 millimeter lens, and he gets in nice and tight. So that intimacy is a direct result of not only using the 24 millimeter focal length equivalent, but actually physically getting in closer. Because if you're shooting at a wide angle with a wide angle at that 12 to 15 foot distance, you're including a lot of stuff in the frame, much of which will probably be distracting, and your subject will appear relatively small in the frame compared to everything else. So one of the only things that you really can do when you're using wide focal lengths is decrease that distance. So if you're typically shooting at 12 to 15 feet, you got to have that, sometimes even more, in order to create that. And the photographer here is really intimate. I mean, he could literally touch the person who's in the foreground, whose hand we see near the bottom of the frame, adjusting the veil. So it's not only the fact that he physically got closer and is using a wide focal length that I like about this photograph. It's the fact that it's layered. We have the foreground subject, then we have the figure in the middle who's adjusting the veil with both of their hands and is looking off to the left. And then we have the third person right behind him to the left, who's similarly garbed and looking to the left of the frame. And it's the combination of the things that appeal to me here. It's the layered composition. It's the intimacy created by using the wider focal length and moving in closer. These are all things that I'm pursuing when I'm going out and photographing. I'll always try to remind myself, get closer, get closer, get closer, moving closer. But just moving in close and using a wide focal length is not going to be the complete remedy. For me, I want to create relationships between all the various elements that I have in the frame. I just don't simply want to shoot yet another photograph of someone walking in front of a mural. I have done that countless times, and those images just don't resonate with me. I've done that, and I know I can do that effectively. I'm trying to sort of push the limits of my own seeing. And when you're trying to compose in this particular way, where you're using these three basically planes of activity within the frame, and you try to bring them together, for me, that's when the image can be really, really successful. It's walking a tightrope. I'll admit that it doesn't necessarily mean that if you're doing all these things that it's going to work all the time. But as you shoot this way and as you fail, you'll inevitably discover what it takes to make images work and how they can be a lot more interesting. There's this sort of intricate balance between all of these choices that you're making that lead you to see not just differently, but more carefully. And I like that this image reminds me to do just that. Here we have a shot by Anang Hanai-Phai. He shot this with a Fuji X70, shot at 640th of a second at 5.6 ISO 400. Now, there are a lot of things that happen when you're out on the street that are just odd, right? You just see something and it's kind of quirky, it's kind of funny. And here we have what I think is a table that sort of folds, and we have this person here who's resting, whose legs and feet we see here in the frame. And I love the shape, the circular white shape, and this saturated colored wall. But what I like about this photograph is the shadow that's there on the right. And the thing that this reminds me is that sometimes I will come upon a scene that I think is kind of interesting, and I'll make a shot, and then I have to remind myself, well, the bones here are pretty good, but maybe I need to wait for something else. And I want you to imagine this shot without the shadow, because I think the shadow here helps to make the shot much more effective. And one of the things that I talk to a lot of my students about is slow down. Don't be in such a rush to move on to the next thing. And work a scene. Exhaust all the possibilities before you move on to the next subject. Because sometimes that first shot, that initial shot that you make, is not the shot that you're going to be pleased with in the end. Sometimes you have to work out a scene and allow it to evolve, allow it to change. And this shot, as simple as it is, it's not as complicated as the previous shot, reminds me of that. Because if I as the photographer saw this scene and I go, oh, there's some nice play of shape, there's great color, I love the shadow at the top, I love the placement of the legs, the shoes that are on the ground. But if I didn't have that shadow, I would have that area on the right-hand side that would just be empty. It'd just be this negative space where there's not much going on, where the shot really isn't balanced for me. And it's just having that shadow there, which is that sort of added element that reminds me, sometimes I have to wait for things like that. It may not be a shadow. It may be a human figure coming into the scene. It may be a bird flying through the sky if I have the camera tilted up and I'm including a lot of a sky in the frame. It's that little sort of accent or gesture, that little something something that I've talked about in numerous videos on this channel that adds a little bit something. And I think that that impatience that we often have about a lot of things in our lives, when it infects our seeing, really robs us of opportunities to make better photographs. There's so many photographs that I see where I go, oh, this would have been so much better if. And the if often isn't about exposure. It's not about focus. It's not about any of the technical things that so many of us concern ourselves with. It's really about how patiently we're seeing the world as we're photographing that. And this shot reminds me to do just that, to slow down, to be patient, and to just wait for that little added flourish that I can't really anticipate what it is, but when it happens, I recognize it. All right, here we have a shot by Tane Ephraim. This is a shot with an Olympus OM2 on film, so we don't have any XF information on it. So what I love about this shot is its stark simplicity. And it's a near silhouette, but it's not just the fact that it's a silhouette that appeals to me. It's the background, and it's the setting on which the gesture of him sort of leaning at the edge of his boat, leaning on this pole, holding this net, where that gesture becomes that much more pronounced. And the background isn't just a blank white wall, right? It has some detail in it. It has the texture of the water, the mountain range in the distance, the other boat at the right edge of the frame. The setting is simple, but it provides a sense of place. It provides context. It provides information that allows the viewer to get a sense of where this photograph is being made. And it's the setting on which the gesture is made incredibly beautifully and dramatically at the same moment. You know, you look at this shot and you see the way this guy's body language is almost dancing at the end of the boat. And how all these repeating triangles that I often talk about on this YouTube channel are ever present. It creates this tension, it creates this drama. Even though we don't see the detail of his face and a lot of the details of his clothing are sort of obscured by shadow, it's very expressive. And you get so much of a sense of this man that he has done this countless numbers of time. And that he's able to do it with the accuracy of a professional dancer while he's fishing. It's a beautiful, beautiful shot, so well balanced. But what this shot reminds me about is not just looking for the gesture in and of itself. I'm always looking for gesture. I'm always looking for interesting body language when I'm making a photograph. But one of the things that I am trying to look for is find a setting in which such gestures can really be made to pop and to stand out. And it's not just about trying to find a clean background. I mean, so many of us have seen a scene where we have this sort of uniform wall. It can be like a white wall or a gray wall or an orange wall, and then we just wait for someone to walk across past the wall and have their legs splayed out. You know, we've seen that. I've talked about that. But that's not enough to make a really interesting photograph. I'm not just talking about, finding yet another uniform wall in which to wait for someone to walk in front of. I'm talking about settings where there is a range of simplicity that's balanced off enough detail to provide a sense of place, that provides an interesting counterpoint to the main subject in the composition. And in this case, all these details, the mountain, the water, the other boat, provide that for me in this particular photograph. And so one of the things I think about when I'm out there shooting is I'm often trying to find the setting before I find the subject. And I think a lot of people kind of do the reverse. They look for an interesting subject to photograph and they raise the camera to their eye. They make the photograph and only later realize that they had a bunch of stuff in the background that did not work, that ruins the shot, that takes away from the subject matter. And I like trying to do the reverse because I know that if I find the setting and I find the light and I find all these other things that I know will make a pretty interesting frame, that it's sometimes just a matter of time before something happens and I'm able to complete the shot with a nice balance for the setting, the gesture, the character. And, sometimes I'll go back and forth. It's not just solely going out there and just looking for setting all the time. I don't want people to think that's I'm thinking so narrowly. I'm not doing that. I just find that by challenging myself to look differently when I'm walking the streets, when I'm traveling, that I will be open to opportunities that I might not see if I'm solely looking for only one type of subject matter or only one sort of scenario for making a photograph. And I think all these shots sort of speak to this idea. It's like, here are all these things, from using a wide angle lens and getting closer, or finding setting before I find character. It's always trying to be conscious of how I'm seeing and how I've seen before, because I don't want to repeat myself. I know it's almost inevitable. I am going to repeat myself. I mean, that's just part and parcel of what I do when I'm out on the street. But I'm conscious of it. And these images help to remind me, and that's why one of the reasons I like looking at the photographs that people submit to the Flickr pool, is I'll get to see images like these that remind me that the next time I go out there, to slow down and take a step back and go, is there another way of seeing this and photographing it? And when I'm able to do that, and I'm able to do that effectively, there's nothing as gratifying. All right, hope you enjoyed that. If you're going to be in the Los Angeles area on April 8th, I am going to be doing a in-person workshop through the Los Angeles Center of Photography, which is based in Hollywood, California. And we'll be doing a full-day workshop, which includes a short lecture at the beginning, and then we take to the streets for about 3 to 4 hours, and then we come back to the studio and we do a critique of the work that's been done there. It's a great opportunity to learn from me, and I'll show you how I approach street photography. You hear me every week in these videos, but this time you'll have an opportunity to actually observe me while I'm doing it, and I'll be able to help you as you navigate the streets of either downtown Los Angeles or Hollywood. So if you want to register, there's still spaces available, and you can do so by just going to lacphoto.org. And if you've never heard of The Candid Frame, The Candid Frame is a podcast which features conversations with photographers about their work and career. We're not talking about equipment for the most part. We're talking about the choices that people make to lead a creative life, whether they're enthusiasts or whether they're professional photographers. To check that out, all you have to do is go to thecandidframe.com, and you can check out the interviews. We also have apps available for Windows, Android, and Apple iOS, which is the easiest way to access the over 364 interviews that we've done thus far. Our latest interview was with George Nabecci. He is a fine art travel photographer whose photographs are very reflective of his own internal life. It's not just about photographing what's outside of himself, what's in front of the lens. He uses the camera to really sort of discover himself and express himself in a really intimate and personal way, which I think will be very inspiring to anyone who listens to the episode. So check it out. And if you like what you're seeing on these YouTube channels, please go to the Candid Frame Flickr pool, ask to be added, and I'll be glad to do that. And if you like what you're seeing in these videos, please subscribe and spread the word. All right. Thanks for joining me again, and I'll see you next time.